graduated 18-year-old who went to Eton College and has recently received an offer to study computer science at Cambridge. So today I've been asked to talk a little about the application process in the UK and my general thoughts around the UK educational system as a whole. But I've decided to split my talk into two main segments. So first of all, there's like general advice towards all applicants towards UK universities with a specialization on Oxbridge and Imperial University. And then secondly, what I think gave me an edge over any other student when applying for a course which is so riddled with high-level applicants. So in order to understand what you need to apply for a UK university, you first have to somewhat understand what kind of education system the UK has. So I'm going to give it from a private school perspective because that's what I have experienced. The state school isn't too dissimilar. It's just the age brackets are slightly different. So it all really starts in year 4, where you take an entrance exam to go to a prep school. And honestly, these prep schools, in my opinion, don't directly affect your resultant university. They just help you prepare thoroughly in order to get into your senior school, which starts in year 9, which is your grade 8. Which starts in year 9, which really does affect your application in its entirety when you're applying for university. So, like I said, in year 9, you go to senior school. So for me, I went to Eton, which is, I'd like to think, pretty well known. And here you prepare for your year 11 and year 13 exams, which are your nationwide standardized exams. You have your GCSEs in year 11, and these are a wide breadth of subjects. So, for example, I took 13, including a variety from like history, French, maths, Latin, computer science, and etc. And I think these allow a student to explore a variety of fields and career paths to discover what's really interesting to them. And honestly, you want to be aiming for straight 9s here. So that's A star star. And in year 13, you specialize. So here is where you get into the nitty-gritty of applying to university. This is where the first step where you really start focusing on your university choice and your course choice. So the first thing you have to decide is what course do you want to study at university? Because in the UK, it's not like America where you can make a choice after you attend university for a year. You have to apply for a course specifically, and you can only study that course. And unless once you get there, you transfer, but that's very rare and also a lot harder to do than you might think. So A-levels are important in this case because you specialize into 3 to 5 subjects, which are used, your grades for these subjects are used to govern your application to university. And certain subjects at university require certain subjects at A-level. So for example, and this might not necessarily make sense. For example, economics at university often requires maths, but never requires economics A-level. And this is because not every school has the opportunity to offer every single A-level because there are hundreds of A-levels, and obviously not every school has the resources to give teachers for every single course. Even a school like Eton, which has a plethora of resources, doesn't have every A-level. We only have an option of, I think, about 25 or 30. So, on to the more important stuff, which is what I think you need to apply for a UK university, especially a top tier one like Oxbridge or Imperial. I think there are 3 main things which you want to focus on. You have your bog standard academic grades, and then the next most important thing is tutor references, and then finally your interview. I'll get onto the interview because it's slightly different from the American one. It's a lot more academic focused, but I'll explain it later. Firstly, academic grades. It's a given that you're going to have good grades, and not just like good, but you have to stand out. You have to stand out to be top a few percent of all applicants worldwide. So that being said, these are only a benchmark. So you will almost never get into a university purely based on how good you are academically. These are just a benchmark to show that you're good enough to attend the university and to continue at the university if you happen to get an offer. For example, if you're applying for Cambridge for a STEM subject, you must have at least 2 A stars and 1 A in your A levels, but pretty much all the applicants have straight A stars. So that's 3, 4, 5 A stars in their subjects across the board. You also can't only rely on just your school grades. You gotta have some kind of proof outside of your school on a larger scale to show that you're good enough to go to this school. So the obvious choices are national competitions. So America has quite a few of them too, but the UK equivalents would be like the British Maths Olympiad, or the Physics Olympiad, and etc. Or you could go for more specific ones. So for example, Oxford University has a computing challenge, which it runs in conjunction with Cambridge. And that's something which I took part in and I did quite well in. So I think that's something which helped me get in. But you have to do your research about these because a lot of these competitions are much smaller, but much more specific and much more valued for these universities. But something which is more important is your tutor reference. So it's similar to the counselor's reference in the Common App application, where it's just an essay about, like, I think in the UK it's about 400 or 500 words, where your tutor, so in my case, my housemaster, because I go to boarding school, the teacher who I have the most interaction with is my housemaster, the person who looks after me in the house. So he wrote mine, and that's just for 500 words for them to write about what kind of person you are and what you do. In my opinion, it's best for you to get your tutor to not write about your academic behavior or your academic attitude for that matter. I think what's more important for them to talk about what kind of person you are, what's your like genuine character, and how you are around school, and what you get involved in. This is because there are 4 or 5 other references which your teachers from year 12 will write about you anyways, about how you are in the classroom and what kind of student you are. So there's no point in getting your tutor to re-emphasize what they say, since all that ends up coming across as is that you don't have anything to say outside of what kind of student you are. It comes across as them saying, oh, this is your personality and that's it, which obviously isn't a great look. So this is where your co-curricular really shines. So whether that's sport, volunteering, drama, music, doesn't matter. Anything works. So for me, my attitude to school has always been give a go at everything. So I was captain of games at my school, so which means I ran sport for about 100 boys, where I managed all of their sporting affairs, whether it was going to matches on time, or picking teams, or captaining our teams, or organizing matches with other people. That was all my job. Volunteering, I did quite a lot of. I helped set up local school. I helped set up local school science days at Eton, using our resources to give people who didn't have the opportunity to do more interesting things, to have a go at things which they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I also did quite a lot of drama. So I was senior tech at my school, which means that I designed all of the sound for all of our productions, which were, I think, this year we had, 37 productions in our theatre. And for me, the one which took a bit of a back step was music. I used to love music back in my prep school, but once I got to senior school, it was the thing I chose to give up, so I had more time to focus on other things. But this is all to do with your tutor reference, because this is important because it really shows what kind of person you are. I think your normal teacher references, which are slightly different, aren't as important, because no matter what they say, all they can say is you're a brilliant student, the best they've ever met. And almost every teacher will always say that about good students, because they want them to do well in life. They want them to do well and get the offer from the university. The tutor reference is the one where the difference is made, where the hairs are split, as they say. This is where you go from being just a great student to an interesting person, which is something which, although not valued as much in the UK as in the US, is still something which is focused on to a certain extent. And part of this assessment comes in the interview, which I think is the most important part of any application in the UK to the universities in the highest echelon. I will want to preface this by saying not all universities have interviews, nor do all universities have entrance tests. This only applies for the best universities, such as Oxbridge or Imperial, and etc. So I'm not going to focus on the universities which don't have these tests, because those are just personal statement based and grade based and your reference based. So all you can do to affect it is your personal statement and your references. I'll talk about personal statement later. The most important part is the interview for these better universities. And no matter how good of a student you are, you can fail if your interview is bad. You might have gotten full marks in all of your entrance tests. You might be predicted 5 A stars. You might have come like 3rd or 4th in like a national Olympiad. But if you turn up on the day and they don't think that you're a good student because of your interview, they will reject you. And 99.9% of the great applicants who get rejected because of their interview. And it's not like the US interview. So from what I've heard, the US interview is kind of a bit of a chat to a certain extent. It's where you go talk to alumni and they find out more about what kind of person you are what kind of person you are, what kind of hobbies you have, what you're interested in, and etc. The UK interview, however, is much more academically focused. They care much more about how you think and how you tackle different academic challenges. Yes, there still maintains the idea of like a personality check to make sure that you're cohabitable, but like it's not that important. What's really important to them is the academic mindset and how you learn and interact with new information. So I will give a quick example using the whiteboard. So a relatively easy interview question might be something of the style, forgive my writing, I'm writing on a mouse, not very used to it. But so for like a computer science applicant, an example might be you have a table like this, right? You have child 1, C1, and child 2, C2. Sorry. Child 2, C2, right? You need to pick, they're picking what show they watched that night. So child 1 might want show 1, right? And this is show 2, this is show 1, and this is show 2, right? So these numbers represent how much each person enjoys the show. So the idea is for these interviews is you get presented with a problem which you've never seen before, or the idea is you've never seen before, because they give you a problem which isn't in the scope of your A-levels and might be something not even in the scope of your subject. So in this case, this is something you learn about in economics. It's called the Nash equilibrium. And this is where there are two perfectly logical parties, so C1 and C2, and they will always make the same decision because that is the most logical decision for both of them. So to explain this better, C1 is picking their show first. If they both pick the same show, they'll watch the show. If they pick different shows, they'll watch the news, and they both don't like the news. And the number represents how much they enjoy that particular show. So for example, in this case, child 1 rates show 1 10 out of 10, and child 2 rates show 1 7 out of 10. And show 2, child 1 rates 7 out of 10, and child 2 rates 10 out of 10, which is really quite a simple concept. And the idea is, if child 1 picks first, he should always pick show 1. Because if he picks show 1, he knows that child 2 will always pick show 1 as well. Because that way they can watch show 1 as opposed to watching the news. So that means the Nash equilibrium is where they both picture 1. I hadn't learned this walking into my Cambridge interview, but this is the situation they gave me, but they didn't tell me anything about the Nash equilibrium. They just told me, if both parties are perfectly logical, there will eventually be a state where both parties will always choose the same option. What is this situation and why? And then after I gave them an answer, they then gave you, okay, this is called the Nash equilibrium. And then they went on to bring more complicated ideas. So for example, if you have a situation where it's not as clear cut, you have this instead. So you have your natural split or steal situation. But this time, both parties choose at the same time. So this is steal, this is split, and this is split, and this is steal. So, and then they gear it up a little. They make it more difficult. So they say, okay, what's Nash equilibrium in this situation? It's slightly different because you don't have 0, 0, and they do it multiple times. Sorry, I just realized this is wrong. Yeah. And so then you talk about more complex situations like this, where in this case, you eventually discover that if they play a finite amount of times, they will always steal. Both should always steal because their average return is 5.5 because it's 10 plus 1 divided by 2. Whereas the contrary, it's 5 plus 0 divided by 2, so it's 2.5. But if they play an infinite amount of times, the Nash equilibrium ends up both being split. I won't go into the details, but that was a very typical interview question. And this is what I mean by they don't really care about how much knowledge you know. For example, I had no clue what this was walking into my interview. But you have to adapt in the moment, and they just want to see how you approach new information and different academic challenges. So in this case, it was learning about a new topic and how you approach it. And so the idea is, at the end of it, you should spot that if it's an infinite amount, you will always get a split situation. Whereas if it's a finite amount, you always get a steal situation. And you just have to figure that out. But that's basically the interview. That's the difference between the interviews. It's just very much more academically focused. They want to know about how you think rather than what kind of person you are. But I guess that brings up the question, how do you prepare for these things? And with interviews and entrance exams, the biggest thing is thinking on your feet. I know it sounds like, oh, that's a given. But honestly, the best thing you can do is just practice. All you can do is just simulate the situation over and over again. Obviously, you can't simulate the nerves or the pressure of actually being in the interview room, but you can simulate it to a certain extent in getting a big empty room, getting a stranger you've never met before to interview you, and just run practice sessions over and over and over again. So for me at school, I think I probably did about 20 or 30 practice interviews in the span of about 2 weeks because you only get 2 weeks notice for your interview. So how it works is you apply first with your grades and your entrance exam, and then afterwards they'll tell you if you got an interview or not. You can get rejected without an interview. And yeah, you get 2 weeks notice at most. For example, my friend, for example, got told 4 days before his before his actual interview. And honestly, all you do is just practice. I mean, the same applies for the entrance exams. You just got to do the papers, do whatever. I know you probably want some kind of like secret method to being good or to getting an offer in this case, in this particular aspect. But honestly, I can't give you any special advice in this particular aspect. It's just you have to practice, and that's it. That's all there is. In this case, the maxim practice makes perfect really is the gold standard. Like, if you can practice more, then do it. There's no other way of cheating your way through. On the contrary, something like the personal statement, there are definitely niche ways of getting your offer. So the personal statement is a self-written essay, which is very similar to the main 650-word Common App essay, which is required for US applicants. And it's sent to all of your schools. And the schools, at school, you will be assigned a teacher or a few teachers who are experienced and do subjects which are similar to yours or the one you're applying for, and they'll just help you. But honestly, in my opinion, they weren't very helpful. Because even at Eton, where all the teachers have been doing this for like decades, some like 60 years almost, and have seen like thousands and thousands of applicants go to these universities and help thousands go into these universities, in the end, they end up kind of just being a proofreader. A lot of the information and ideas come from yourself. And honestly, most people just end up talking to consultants. So for me, I was quite lucky. My mother's in this field of work. This is her job. So I didn't have to go very far to find a great consultant. So I just had a chat with her. And for me, it's just the personal statement is kind of, it's not really a brag sheet, but it's not really a story like it is in the US. So for the UK, what you want to do is you want to tread a very fine line between just bragging and also engaging the reader. I guess the difference between the UK and US, in my opinion, is the US, the essays you read are a lot more emotive. They tug at your heartstrings a lot more. In the UK, a lot of it is just like, oh, I did this, this, and this, and this, and this is why it makes me a good applicant. But you can't just list things. You can't just say, I did this, this, this. I came first in this competition, came third in this one. I went to this competition. I qualified for this camp, etc. That's kind of useless. Like, you could just send a CV in then. There's no point in having an essay. Instead, what you want to focus on is not what you did or how you did it, but most importantly, why does it make you a better applicant? And honestly, that's up to you to decide. So depending on the different parts of your personal statement, it might make you a better applicant in different ways. So it might make you a better applicant because, oh, you are academically minded, you're very smart, you're going to keep up with studies, you're going to do interesting research, etc. That's perfectly fine. That's a very possible advantage of one of your activities. But on the other hand, it could be something like, oh, you play a lot of sports, and you think that's made you a more communicative, easy to talk to, relatable person, and you think it'll make you someone who brings together community at university more. But it's really up to you what you say about what you've done. And honestly, although there's a big difference, there seems to be many differences between the UK and the US application. The criteria by which an applicant is assessed is very similar. The only difference is that there's more of a focus on your pure academic character in the UK, whereas the US places more focus on your activities outside the schoolroom. For me, this was particularly apparent when back in September, I was still thinking about applying to the US. And I had a quick chat with a consultant whom Bella introduced to me, since a lot of the things he advised me to do, I learned from and applied to a certain extent in my UK application. Like, although it wasn't like directly, oh, he told me to do this if I was going to apply for the US, so I did it in my UK as well. It wasn't really that kind of direct application, but it was more of he said this thing about the US application, and it made me think about how the UK application was different and the general concepts around writing a personal statement. And then that helped me a lot. So like, not necessarily just for UK applicants, but applicants to any educational institution which requires like some form of written piece, my advice would be you just need to like talk to people who are older than you and are more experienced. Like you might not necessarily use their direct advice, but just talking to them gives you the chance to learn. Like you might completely disagree with what they say. I mean, I'll be the first to admit some of the stuff my mum says, even if it's right, I don't necessarily agree with, but that comes with different experiences and different upbringings. So that's more of like a personal aspect, but I still learn from what she said because what she says is still useful. Regardless of if I think I'm going to directly use that thing, I can still learn from something I disagree with. So I think the most important thing for these applications is just talk to people. The more people you talk to, the better, especially when they have more experience than you. But yeah, that's about all I had to say. So I'll hand it over to my mum to talk about her perspective on my application, I guess.
Cool. 听下来就是真是一个非常优秀的孩子啊，真的是为我们的大熊感到骄傲。这个你分享了很多你在学校的做体育部长的很多的经验，你领导了很多的人，然后你在申请的过程中，然后你有很多很多的经验，包括你在这个就是跟你的年长的学长或者很有经验的人去 talk。我就觉得就是说，那么我觉得更好的理解呢，就是说妈妈可以补充一下，比如说在这个过程中，我知道就是说任何一个父母，虽然你作为一个教育专家，当然你同样的就是对于申请这个大学你有一定的焦虑，或者是你的 concern，就是说你现在你可以简单的就是说对于儿子讲了这一段之后，我也想请你做一个简单的阐述，比如在这个过程中你有什么补充吗？或者你有说说你的想法？
One quick thing, someone's just asked, can you apply to Oxford and Cambridge at the same time? The answer to that is no, you can't. You have to pick one or the other. The only exception is if you're applying to medicine, I think you can apply to both. But don't quote me on that because I didn't apply for medicine, so I'm not really sure. But have at it, Mum.
好的，那妈妈可以刚刚做第一轮这个阐述完之后，你做一个补充，比如说你是怎么想的？他在这个过程中，你有什么可以补充的地方吗？
可以的。其实呢，在这整个申请的过程之中，从家长的角度，我们一定有很多焦虑。即使是我做这一行的，当遇到自己的孩子在这个过程之中的时候，也会有很多多余的压力。那我们有很多争执，其实有很多不同的意见。毕竟我的想法就像刚才大雄讲的，从我自己的个人经历总结出来的一些东西，对于他来说不太适用。而且我相信在美国的家长们也都意识到，当我们把孩子们带到国外的时候，有一点必须我们能够认可的，就是他们一定很有自己的想法。你想主导他们是不可能的，我们只能给他们在后面递子弹，他们要想往哪儿走，我们给他一些帮助而已。
对，资源。
刚才呢，大雄讲了很多，但他特别讲到的是 interview 这个地方。interview 这个地方是非常非常重要的，因为在我们的学生里面，比比皆是的都是明明要求4门课，学校他学了5门，每一门都是 A 星，都是最佳的，满分9分，都是 A 星，1个星、2个星的，为什么还是被拒了？就是在interview 的这一关，可能他刚才讲的内容呢，我们很多人不太能够听得懂，但是希望如果可能的话，让你们的孩子看一下，从这个里面能够抓住一些中心思想。他这个学校到底想要什么样的学生？他为什么给他出这道题？他是没有标准答案的，因为牛津、剑桥的很多他们的面试题，我们自己也知道，原来就有大家半开玩笑的说，就很奇怪的一些题，包括问星期二是什么颜色的。当然这不是问那个理科学生啊，或者什么，他没有要求你 一定要有标准答案，但你至于怎么答，靠你自己。像他刚才讲了很多他的心得，可是每一科目呢，只能说我们能够理解到的，我觉得还是要靠自己。
对，其实大学往往包括我们美国的芝加哥大学，有的时候在申请的过程中，它有很多问题都非常刁钻的。比如说1+1为什么等于3，对吧？像类似这种问题，实际上没有标准答案的，它可能就是让你拓展你的想象力。因为大家知道啊，就是说 AO 就是 Admission Officer，在美国或者是在牛津剑桥 AO 的人的年龄是18到60岁。你的文书、你的申请文书 application， 你所有的这些东西怎么能够征服他，让他知道你就是他想找的人，就是他就是 looking for you， 就是为什么是这样子？所以就说，那他肯定是找就是说杰出的人才或者是聪明的人，你的回答能够让他觉得耳目一新，或者是说就觉得能够有所收获，所以这就是高端的学府都是这样子的，
我们在聊的同时呢，因为以大熊为主啊，我看到有家长提了一些问题，大熊你可以讲一下，回答一下吗？
对，就是你为什么会选？
可以，
对，你为什么会选
可以，可以。
剑桥？就是说没有选择牛津，对，这是一个好问题。
嗯，你得看你想学什么科目。给我想学 computer science，对吧？所以我感觉牛津的 computer science 的那个 course，it's a bit old-fashioned, in my opinion. I think it's too focused on the theoretical aspects of the subject. So for me, Cambridge was the clear choice because there was a much more practical element to the course. You learn much more about how to actually apply your knowledge. You learn how to actually apply your knowledge in the real world, as opposed to just learning about, oh, in theory you could do this, but that's not possible because we don't have the technology to do it. Because to me, that seems like a somewhat pointless exercise. I know it can be an academic exercise, which is interesting intellectually, but practically, it doesn't really achieve much. So for me, that was the big thing, the course. I think for most people, it's the course which governs what university you want to pick, because most people decide what course they want to do and then what university they want to go to, rather than the other way around. Well, at least in the UK. So the general idea is that the Cambridge STEM subjects have the edge over the Oxford STEM subjects, and the Oxford Humanities have the edge over Cambridge Humanities. But that's a very large generalization, and you have to look at specific courses and their different modules and their approach to teaching that subject for you to understand which university you want to pick. I guess following that, what's more important a lot of the time to UK applicants is what college to pick when you go to these schools. So the university system for Oxbridge is different to perhaps anywhere else in the world. I'm not really sure. Actually, I think Yale or Princeton have a collegiate system. But Oxbridge have a collegiate system where each university has about 50 colleges, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. Deciding which college you want to go to after deciding your university, that's where a lot of the work needs to be done. Because every college has small strengths, small weaknesses, and yes, they are all part of the same university. They all come under the same banner, but there are definitely different levels between each subject within each college. So, for example, Trinity Cambridge, well known in the UK to be academically the best college in Cambridge, which it is. But that's only really for STEM subjects. If you look towards like humanities or like music, for example, it's nowhere near as strong as some other colleges, such as like Key's College, which is much lesser known. But for example, for music or modern languages, it's exceptional. So you really want to look at individual colleges and spend time looking at that if you're planning to apply for Oxbridge. Also, Oxbridge published the data for all of their applications every single year. So they break it down in terms of subjects, in terms of genders, sex, in terms of college, and they show you like proportion of international students, home students, and they show you what proportion, and they also show you what proportion of people who get an offer, who don't take it or fail it. There's a long document every year published by Cambridge and Oxford individually to show all the information you'll ever need, basically.
这个里我补充一下哈，其实有家长想对牛津和剑桥感兴趣的，首先我们要了解一下，牛津和剑桥是非常非常独特的两所大学，它跟其他任何大学都不一样的地方，它叫学院制。学院制的意思是说，别看它有说30几所学院，每一个学院就像学生的一个家一样。他们上课的时候呢，是到一个 department， 比如说上电脑课，每个学院的学生上那个 department 去上课。但他回到他自己的 college 里面，就像他的宿舍，像他的家一样，而在他家里生活、居住，一起做一些什么就是衣食住行，在他的 college 里面上课呢，是在不同的 department。这个制度只有在牛津和剑桥是这种制度，叫学院制。包括当然它还有一些1对1的这种导师制，什么有细节。最重要的就是说，大家要了解它是学院制的，它不是像我们其他别的大学，你是住在宿舍，然后你在一个大家我们都是一个系的，我们就是同学。其实它是非常不一样的。它这个源头是由于它的私立学校，在他们所上的私立学校就已经是这样的，一直延续下来，延续到了牛津、剑桥，就很像他高中阶段的这个状态是一样的。伊顿公学里面有25栋楼，每栋楼里面有60个、70个孩子，然后每一个孩子呢都是在那儿衣食住行在这儿，有个大家长，但他上课的时候肯定都孩子们夹个小书包，然后就去了化学楼，去了音乐楼，去了什么有什么课上什么楼。就是牛津、剑桥是这样的一个制度，所以在我们申报之前要先了解它跟别的地方有什么不同。然后大雄，你愿意回答一下？有家长在问一下，在 Imperial 这个地方能不能在申请牛剑的时候，另外还有就是说，在 UK 的 CUS 这儿可以怎么个申请多少是这个程序，你也可以讲一下。
OK，我刚才已经回答了，可是就是 Imperial 你可以一起报，只是牛津和剑桥你不能一起报，你就选一个报。可是全部练习大学你想报就报。然后你报我们在英国有个 system 叫 UCAS，就是跟 Common App 差不多一模一样。然后 UCAS 你就只能选5个大学，就是5个大学，然后你得选出来，你想报牛津剑桥你就选一个，然后你还得选一个 backup，还得选一个 safety。OK 不是必须的，可是你的老师都会告诉你，你应该选一个，因为你不选的话，有可能就是你明年没有大学上，你可能就是一个 offer 都没收到，所以你就还有2个 places 你可以自己选，报什么大学都可以。所以我报的时候，我报的是剑桥、Imperial、UCL、Bath 和 Durham。可是我的 plan 一直都是，我没收到剑桥的 offer 的话，我会再等1年，然后 reapply。可是我报的时候，我不想跟老师解释，说你还是应该加进去，就看一看。你收到这个 offer 的话，你也可以去，but you don't have to, you know? It's just more of like you have 5 university slots, you might as well put a university in every single one of them, because you've written the application, you've done it all already. There's no point in not adding the universities, because there's no extra work except adding the universities in just on the list. So yeah, in the UK, 5 university applications in 1 year and only 1 out of Oxbridge.
然后呢，还有一样就是他申请的专业，他也不像说在美国每一所学校你可以申请不同的专业。对，大雄，您可以这儿也讲一下说，因为他只是递交一份。
Yeah. Well, okay. So technically, you can apply for multiple different subjects in one application. You can say, okay, I'm going to apply for Cambridge for computer science. I'm going to apply to Imperial for Spanish. I'm going to apply to Bath for history. But that's just a bad idea because your personal statement is the same for all of them. So if you write about all of your STEM activities in your personal statement, and you talk about how you've done this computer science project, you've made this app, or you've made this, like you've done this physics experiment, or you've done this project or whatever, or you've written this essay for this history essay prize. If you apply for a subject which isn't related to your personal statement, then it seems it's just a bit daft. Like you're obviously not going to get in because clearly you've shown your strengths are elsewhere. Why are you then saying, okay, I want to study this subject, which I haven't shown I'm good at all? So yes, you can apply for several different subjects, but it's just not a good idea because you won't get any of them apart from the one which you focus on. And you don't have the word count to write about multiple subjects within one personal statement. Because if you're splitting up your words like that, you're not going to have enough information about either topic, either subject for you to get into a top tier university.
对，这就是把我们的在英国申请这儿其实给限定住了。尽管它允许你，但是注定的在特定的字数之内，你所写的这个 PS，你只能 focus 在一个 subject 上。这个也是要家长们注意的。就你一定要在来英国之前，你想好了，我就想学这个 computer science，其他别的我没想过，就不可能像美国那么灵活。
对，美国的大学是可以，比如说我耶鲁可以选择 computer science，我比如说 Cornell 我可以选择其他的，比如说其他经济学呀、business 专业。对英国我知道你们牛津跟剑桥只能选一个，一共就只能选5个学校，
对，而且专业也基本上就只能选一个。还有一个地方呢，还有一个地方呢，就是想报 UK 的这些学生，只适合一类学生，就是我已经非常坚定的，我将来就想学这一门了。不像美国大学，在第1年、第2年，我都是学的 general 的一些课程，我将来还可以改。在英国没有，很难很难去改。这个系统呢，我们不能说它合理不合理，但它一直流传下来。基本上像刚才大雄讲的，你在15岁、16岁的时候，你已经注定了你可能要学哪一个领域。比如说你想当医生，如果你当时因为他的 A level 高中课程只选4门，4门课里如果你没有选生物，当时你把生物 drop 掉了，你没选生物，当时你想当律师，你想当建筑师，你没选生物。过后了的时候呢，2年以后你想当医生，对不起 ，it's too late，来不及了。其实这个制度本身不合理的，因为在 teenager 阶段，孩子们的想法会变化的。可是没办法，我们只能照着这个规矩来走。然后如果要是有一些孩子觉得说，我现在还其实没想好，我要想再考虑考虑，我再读哪一个专业，其实我不建议他们来英国。英国这个制度要很早就已经提早预定，就很像他们的人做事情。3年以后的某一天下午几点钟，他想去哪儿去干什么，跟谁开个会，有的人都在本子上已经记好了。所以他这个整个体系能透露出这种那个概念出来，家长们也要想好了。
对，就是非常强硬啊，感觉就很强硬。
对，大雄好像
有这么自由跟灵活。
对，有一个问题，他们想说，is there such thing as pre-med track in UK colleges? Yes. I guess I should first say the UK times schedule is different to the US. Well, it's not that different. So your final application deadline is in, I think it's mid-November. I think this year was about November 15th. And that is your final application to submit UCAS to everyone, like all 5 universities. That being said, you can submit your application anytime before that, but if you're applying to Oxbridge or you're applying for medicine, there's such thing as fast track. And the deadline for that this year was October 13th.
16
Oh,
号
16th.
16
16th.
号
Mid-October. And so that's effectively the like the medicine track. So it's called fast track. And for medicine, it's slightly different. You apply for 5 different universities for medicine, and you write a personal statement for that. But you are forced to select one extra university. It could be one of the ones you've already applied for, but you have to pick a course which isn't medicine. And you can submit a separate personal statement for that specific application. So, for example, I have a good friend who's now got an offer to go study maths at St. John's College in Cambridge, but he applied for medicine originally. So he applied for medicine at Cambridge as well as 4 other places. And then his 6th application, which is only the case, which you only get if you're applying for medicine, was for maths at Cambridge, which the idea of the 6th one is to give you a chance to pick a safety option because medicine is so competitive. Obviously, he didn't get the memo and applied for maths at Cambridge anyways, but he got the offer and has now chosen to do that instead of medicine at a less well-known school. So yes, I guess I'm not sure really what you mean by pre-med track because I don't really know the American system that well. But yes, there's a different process for applying to medicine than any other subject, if that's what you're asking.
回答的非常好，这是一个非常好的问题，就是英国的医学体系，就是申请医学院体系跟美国是截然不同的。它据我知道，就是说有好几种途径可以深入，就直接申，学了几年之后直接申，完成高中教育是不是就直接申了儒家，对吧？直接可以申请。在美国就需要从完成本科的学历之后，再申请医学院是研究生的体系，所以这个是非常不一样的，非常 different 的。
Yeah, so you can immediately apply for medicine in the UK. So I guess it's not really pre-med. You just straight up learn medicine, and then you take it for 3 years as an undergraduate. But if you want to become a doctor, you have to continue. I think in total, I think it's 7 years or something like that. But I don't really know that well because I haven't applied for it.
是的，
对的，对的，就是如果其实家长们要在申请英国大学的这个有什么疑问的话呢，你们可以说找 Bella 或者找我来问，然后希望我们能够片言自语，能让你们少走一些弯路。因为我们这儿呢，因为我们这边的机构呢，从他们8岁开始起的这个叫低龄留学开始，一直做上来，做到大学这部分。当然，我们做的都是，比如说他的伊顿、温彻斯特、哈罗这样的学校的 feeder school，这样一路上来的，我们非常了解这个系统，希望能够帮上大家。
你可以把你可以把你的联系方式留在对话框里，然后如果有朋友对家长对英国的留学或者是说申请英国的学院感兴趣的，可以直接联系儒家。我跟儒家是多年的好友，而且我们虽然那个大熊的申请是由我们来做的啊，就是说在文书这部分由我们的专家给出了很多意见，但是呢，我也是希望你们如果英国申请就直接找儒家，儒家可能更专业，对，而且有这么优秀的这个儿子培养出来的话，他我估计可能会这方面，比如说申请牛津剑桥这方面会给出非常多好的非常有用的信息来的，
我把那个邮箱打上去了。其实所谓的专业，没有人生出来就是专业和专业人士、专家，无非就是说我们经验多了，见的孩子多了，见的 case 多了，就比较有经验一些，能给大家分享，你们能少走一些弯路。我们也是一步一步走过来，甚至呢，我也从儿子身上学到了很多。在这个过程之中呢，我从他身上我知道说有几个点，当他坚持的时候。我认为他是对的。 所以就是一路走过来，我们累积的经验更多一些。当然了，在低龄留学这儿，我们轻车熟驾，在申请那个牛剑这一部分呢，是现在我们刚刚才是觉得有点得心应手了。因为以前嘛，因为他英国的教育体制，我不知道大家知不知道在，初高中这一部分是怎么样做的。他的是8岁到13岁是一个阶段，13岁到18岁是一个阶段。他们把8岁到13岁叫预备小学，预备学校。其实从名字我们就知道什么叫预备学校，预备给谁预备啊？叫 prep school 嘛。那肯定是给13到18岁这个阶段来预备，也就是说，他几百年以来流传下来，他们认为真正人接受教育的时候，在古代以前呢，只有13到18岁才是接受教育的学校，需要被教育了。那慢慢的，在13岁以前，好像也得学点啥，于是呢，他就叫预备学校，叫 prep school，准备好了。给你们往这儿去送学生的一个阶段，所以它最重要的就这2个阶段。这个我的感受是，所谓你也知道，来了英国以后和来了美国，随着咱们中国人越来越多，因为中国人特别勤奋、特别努力，大家都是越来越卷。如果早一点来的话，他的教育体制像一台大的机器，你把他孩子扔到这个机器里面去，越早。你基本上就越轻松，它自然而然就运转。就像在一个 feeder school 的话，对口学校，他1/3的孩子他都上伊顿，你就想咱们作为一个中国人的孩子，他怎么就能够真的笨到那个程度，连1/3都达不到吗？咱这么说有点太过，意思是说，他但凡差不多，就希望就很大，因为这个孩子一共这个学校今年考试的一共有50个人或者60个学生，他有将近20个孩子都上伊顿，那当然你的几率就大了。所以这个问题吧，你应该是越早越好。可是由于每个人家庭状况不一样，条件也不同，这也是看因人而异的。只是让大家了解一下，这个机构就是这样的。如果你要早进来，你不用太努力，不用拼到什么样，卷到什么样，就跟着他们的节奏走就好。
我在这里问大雄一个问题，就是，我也知道，就刚刚在开头的时候说了一下啊，可能有些人没有听到。就当时我知道你是，跟英国女王，你都知道我要问什么，跟女王共进午餐，跟那个，散步。当时你是怎么被在你们这个伊顿公学被选出来，然后去作为唯一一个代表去跟学校的这个，去代表女王跟散步吃午餐？那当时你介绍一下你的感觉是怎么样的？女王有什么不同吗？虽然就是我们女王已经不在了，所以就说讲一点花边新闻给我们大家。
Um, I guess first of all, the big thing is I'm an academic scholar at Eton, so I'm what's called a King's Scholar. And there are 14 in each year. There are 14 flat in each year worldwide, and so the Queen was any important person always has lunch in college, which is where the King's Scholars live. And so it was going to be someone in my house, and there are 70 boys in my house. After that, she wanted to talk to the new boys, the people who had just gotten to Eton, because it was only in my I think it was in my second term at school. So she wanted to talk to the new boys who and what they thought of the school, because I don't know if any of you know this, but Elizabeth herself, Her Majesty herself, was educated at Eton. So although she didn't officially attend the school with all the other students, she was taught at Eton by Eton teachers just on a one-to-one basis. So she wanted to talk to the new boys and how they found it. And of the 14 of us, to be honest, I don't know why I was chosen, but I was chosen. And I was just told to sit at the end of the table, wasn't told anything. And then obviously halfway through, all of a sudden, the Queen walks in and sits down next to me, which you might have thought was quite a nice surprise, but honestly, I think it was just a bit terrifying. But considering she walked in with like a whole suite of bodyguards, but yeah, so just sat down, had a chat, quite, I would say, a very polite chat, because well, the Queen isn't really allowed to have any opinions, in terms of anything which can have any meaning beyond a very surface level. So like she's allowed to think, oh, the weather's nice today, but she's not really allowed to talk about anything which is remotely political or any kind of opinions or different views or discussions, because it can obviously cause a lot of media outrage. So honestly, the conversation was very plain. It was a lot of, how are you finding school? Think it's great. There's quite a lot of people here. The people in the top tiers are quite scary because they're quite tall. That was about it. But yeah, and then we just had a chat about, it was kind of just like her recounting her memories of being at Eton and seeing how it's changed compared to how it was when I was first joined, well, 5 years ago now, I guess. So yeah, I mean, she was really nice, if that's what you're asking. Like, she was really, really nice. But like, I don't think she was any different from like one of my friend's grandmothers would have been.
是的，妈妈这次回去知道了哈，这个内幕了，我帮你问出来了哈。
他一点儿不觉得这件事情有什么，
对
是因为是他的荣耀，他只是些 randomly 的，他是一个很普通的像 grandma 一样的一个人，问一些普通的事情，然后走了一段路，到了岔路口，觉得那我该上课了，跟邻居家的那个，其实是因为他们在这个所特定的这个学校，在这个学校里所出现的这些，政要的人物啊，什么和这个电视上常常出现的人物非常正常，
非常多也很正常，所以
都在这儿，导致了他们就很淡定对这种现象。他刚才提到了一个细节，可能说，你没有注意到的是，伊顿公学是一所男校，但是女王是在这儿接受教育的，
哇，
所以呢，他当时上课的时候呢是1对1的，他没有参加到孩子们的上课，因为都是男校。就他小的时候，
刚才你儿子提到了他女王认为一个非常体面的一个教育就是1对1的，
就是他只能说1对1的利用这个伊顿的教学资源来去教他，他的整个读书的过程是在这儿的。这个如果您要想听花边新闻，应该算一个小的新闻，就是他在这儿接受教育，在一个男校里面上学的，
而且是1对1的，没有跟别的男校混在一起。
然后有一个家长问到说，关于这个申请美国学校为什么会后来选择剑桥，这个其实我觉得我可以回答一部分。这个问题就是说，根据每个家庭的状况不一样。对于我来讲，我们肯定是觉得两边大学都差不多，我们很想他两边都体会到。我的理想状态，我是想说，要么你在美国上大学，中间一部分的时候，因为两边的学术它都会有一些project 是两边都有的。我们设定的是在这边读2年以后呢，第3年去申请一个合作项目，因为像牛津、剑桥每年都跟哈佛、Stanford 和那个MIT 啊这些知名的大学都有一些合作项目，而每年都有好几十个学生来回串着做交换生。大学嘛，就最好多体验一些其他别的国家的生活呀、民风啊。所以当时开始我们是有一些争执的。孩子嘛，到这个时候他一定会想说，我只要离开家就很开心。当时牛津、剑桥选择的时候，当然他那个我知道他那个说的学术的内容、学科的内容很重要，还有一部分原因是我翅膀硬了，我想飞出去看看。只要不是牛津，哪儿都行。原因是我们家住在牛津，所以他从小长大的地方，他就很想去外面看一看。那美国也是这样，他也很想去那儿。 但我很想他留下来，这个是属于完全很私人的一个状态。那最后呢，也能够说服他说，好，你前面2年呢在剑桥读，然后申请一个合作的项目，在第3年的时候，这个时候你的思想相对成熟了，你所选择的科研的项目，一定这个时候已经差不多有方向了。在有方向性的情况下，他可以选择在美国的哪一所大学的哪一个教授，他研究的内容刚好是他想要的，这样你不会浪费掉前面2年的时间。Sorry 啊，我这样说不好，因为都是美国的家长，因为我们认为美国的大学前2年就很像高中的一个延续，还是学很多门课，还是说在你可以有很多机会选择的时候，而在英国，第一，大学只有3年。这3年完全学的都是你真正的学术内容，就没有在像美国一样，前面2年还在选择过程。对，我就想让他说，这2年你一样学你的专业的内容，等第3年的时候，你回到你去到美国的一所大学，你依然做的是你专项的一个研究，这就是我们的想法。当然，每一家选择不一样，那可能美国的家长会想着说。我要我的孩子在我身边前2年，第3年的时候，第4年我再送到美国去，送到英国或其他别的国家有一些合作项目的。其实大家都可以想，因为这条路对学生来讲还是蛮有益的。这样回答家长的问题。
Just one piece of advice for people in America who want to come to the UK for university. It's better to come earlier rather than later, I think, in terms of if you want to come for university and you're not already like in your senior year or something, come earlier rather than later. Because from what I have friends in America. I went to the Harvard pre-college camp a couple of years back just for a bit of fun. And a lot of that, I have one of them who was really smart, but he came over 2 years ago now. No, last year. And he said the jump in academic level between senior year in America in high school to your first year at university in the UK was really big. So I would recommend coming earlier, because as soon as you get here, you'll realize that the UK, like I've discussed this with my friends in America and also teachers alike, and a lot of them have said, like, until university, your first year in American university is basically playing catch up with the rest of the world. So whether it's like Zurich in Switzerland or the UK universities, they basically start in your second year, which means that the first year at university is just catch up for high school students across America. And that's not because the American system is worse, it's just because there's a larger difference between the standards in high schools in America, because it's a larger place. And that just means they need to level out the playing field for everyone who's going to these universities, so that everyone is starting from the same point at least. So everyone has the basic knowledge they need in order to get further in their field of study. Whereas in the UK, I think the state school, like the tippity top for your high schools are the same, if not better, in my opinion. In my opinion, I think they're better, but I'm biased. But I think the average, like the lower state school, public state schools, I think the standard of those is slightly higher, which means that the jump from A levels to universities is nowhere near as large. And also, that being said, if you're going to come to the UK and you end up going to private school, you have to be very prepared, because private school in the UK is no joke. Like, you might think, so like, we often joke about how, I don't know, Mum, how many days of holiday do we have a year? Like, what is it, like 150, 200 or something? But you might think, you might think that, like, oh, because you have so many days of holiday, it's like, oh, it's really easy, you're just chill. But the reason you have so much holiday is because you're so busy during the term time. So, like, if I give you a quick example, on a Monday, for example, I will literally not return to my room between, like, 7:45 a.m. when I go to breakfast until 11 p.m. I'm out of my room the whole day, out doing things. The first free time I get is at 11 p.m. Except from it's not really free time because I have to do my homework. So a normal day for me at school would be get up at like 5:36 and go to sleep at like 12 or 1.
对，这个要警告一下咱们美国的家长们，如果你们真的想让孩子读这边的精英的学校，要舍得。说实话，我是很心疼的，因为他们早上我的孩子没有时间睡觉，就是没有时间睡觉。他的这个没有时间睡觉，并不像国内的孩子那种要一直做功课，而是他从出去开始起，一直到晚上11点钟回来的时候，还没写作业呢。不是说社团的事情，要么就是说有一次我记得是在10点多打电话的时候，快10点半打电话的时候，他说他走在路上，在去一个 debate 的一个 club 的那路上，然后10点45分结束，完了以后走路5分钟回到家，回到宿舍，然后再用5分钟洗漱，然后11点之前熄灯睡觉。就他们的时间是以分钟来卡住的，他们的学习和生活特别紧，特别累。他们的假期1年之中呢，我们常常半开玩笑说，哎呦，付了那么多的学费，总给我们放假，1年上课时间才100多天，放假的时间有200多天，但你看他们上课的状态非常非常非常累，一周6天，他们的一周是6天上课的，而上课的时候呢，不全是学术。其他的别的事物，我们有时候开玩笑讲说，你们这个就即使他们在 A level 最后的考试，也就我们讲的高3毕业生，学校给他们安排的任务非常非常多，所有的学校管理，因为比如说大熊是体育部长，他都要 A level 最后的那个冲刺的那个考试了，他依然要安排整个学校所有的比赛，因为他们学校的比赛赛事是很重要的，有主场有客场。然后多少 N 多个几十个球队的比赛，他都要去做这些所有的工作，还要编辑所有的这个戏剧社的那个演戏啊，什么排戏的音乐的编辑，还要再做很多 volunteer。我们都说除了学习没时间，这个学校给孩子们安排的什么都有时间。就我们会抱怨，因为毕竟要考试了，我们也会注意他们的成绩，所以这些事情都要想清楚。孩子到这儿来挺辛苦的，有一段时间我看我儿子的话，2点钟才睡觉，6点钟又爬起来了。这个要想清楚，可能跟我们美国不一样，我不太了解美国，要问一下贝拉，是不是你们的相对来说私校会比较轻松呢？
我觉得公校跟私校的社会活动的安排呢，就是说其实并不取决于，就是可能私校会多一些，可能私校会设定的很多的项目 program 会很多，给你提供的资源也很多。但是我儿子是在公校毕业的，那我儿子呢，就说我觉得他对社团，就我儿子自己的理解就是他的社团的选择也是他自己选了很多很多。其实他在高中阶段，我也认为他睡得特别少。他就是也经常是2、3点钟睡觉。比如说他选择的课程 AP 课会比较多，他从10年级那一年选了5门，然后呢11年级他又选了3、4门，所以他 AP 课选的很多。另外一个他又是自己有 club，然后又是学生会的主席，又是辩论队的，又有童子军，所以我儿子的睡眠的时间也非常少，而且再加上他们公校有的时候非常好的公校，他会经常考试。比如说一周一考，一周一考，每周都有好几类别的考试，所以就孩子就是经常就是非常紧张的时间。因为我们在高中阶段也是睡得很少的，所以就是这个可能取决于你的选择的社会活动，还有你选择的一些，比如说，当然私校会提供很多的这种就是那种program 会比较多，比公校会选的很多，或者 AP 课的课程啊，IB 的课程会比较多，所以就是这也是。大家在真正这美国的高中跟英国的高中，据我理解，就都非常辛苦的。如果你真的想成为一个非常好的孩子，就是精英的这种孩子的话，去一个非常好的大学，你光是每天玩游戏或者玩手机，或者是说浏览一些，比如说其他的一些网站，那你可能花费了大量的无用的时间，你没有那么多时间去 focus 在你自己的功课或社会活动上。 是这样子的。其实都是一样的。
有一个大区别，区别就是在英国你去私立学校的话，你不能选择用很多时间去学习。Like you don't have the option to. AP classes don't exist. You don't have additional classes. They don't exist. You have your lessons. That's it. You have your homework, your lessons. If you want to do more, that's not within the school. That's your own stuff outside the school, and you get no credit. Also, there's no such thing as like college credit. That doesn't exist in the UK. But you don't get any recognition for doing these things within the school, at least. When you apply for university, they can be useful, but within the school, they don't care. Instead, what fills up your time is your extracurriculars. And one thing you have to be prepared for, if you come to private school, you will get forced to do extracurriculars. Like, even if you don't enjoy sport, you hate sport, you don't want to touch grass, you will get forced to go every afternoon to go play an hour or two of football or rugby or whatever sport. Sorry, soccer, rugby or whatever sport. And you might think that's like cruel or not very fair, but honestly, even my friends who don't like sport think it's a good idea because it gets people out of their comfort zone. It gets people to try something new. Also, sport isn't just fun. I mean, a lot of the concept around sport in the UK is that it's actually helpful towards a student in terms of learning as well. Because obviously gives them the fresh air, gives them the exercise to make sure that they're healthy. But also you learn like skills like communication, responsibility, stuff like that. But I guess a big part of it is just to have fun. But like, yeah, you need to be prepared to do things you don't want to do. So like, I guess a typical day for me would be like Tuesday, let's pick Tuesday. My lessons finish at lunch on a Tuesday. I don't have anything after lunch, technically. I do have, you have compulsory sport for like 2.5 hours, I think, which gets you to like 4:30. But then after that, technically, you have free time. But like for me, I do 4:30, finish football. 4:45, got basketball practice. That's still 6. 6:15, got badminton practice. 7:30, dinner. 7:30, 8:30, you have 8:15, you have like a little meeting within your house to run through some like logistics and like just making sure everyone is aware of what's going on, like administratively. But then 8:35 or 8:45, 8:35, you have what's called societies, and that's like a lecture where an external speaker will come in and talk to you about their field. So you get speakers from like all over the world. So you get like, for example, Julian Dunkerton, who was the CEO of Superdry, came in quite recently, or like the ambassadors for the Philippines and South Korea to the UK came to Eton to talk. But you get to meet a lot of interesting people. But that's from 8:35 through till 10. And then often from 10 to 11, if you have other club memberships, like if you're big in like theatre, for example, you often will go to the theatre at 10. And then you might spend depending on how taxing the work is that week. So if it's show week where there's a performance going on, I might be in the theatre for up to 20 hours a week. But obviously if there's no show week, I might only go there for like an hour or so just to like touch up a few things here or there. So you get back to bed at like 11 and then you can do your homework and whatever. But I guess it's the same in the UK where it's like most of it is optional. Like if you want to, you could sit in your room for the 6-7 hours after games ends. But you still have that aspect of compulsory sport, which obviously doesn't sound the most enticing if you don't enjoy sport. But it's something I think which is really good. Obviously, I've ended up enjoying sport to begin with. Wasn't the biggest fan. Like it was fine, but it ended up being one of the things I enjoyed most at school, and I spend the most time doing. But like, yeah, compulsory sport. That's something you'll have to deal with if you end up coming.
时间上真的是分秒必争啊，听起来。但是这个学校也是非常有意思的一个伊顿公学，很多名人都过来，对，
它有利有弊。其实一方面孩子们非常辛苦，但另一方面呢，我们从他身上也知道了，学到一些东西。英国人的这种，我们可以说它是刻板，但他们真的是时间是以分钟来计算的，你只能这样。然后再就是，在英国这儿呢，你要是如果从小学开始起就在这儿的话，你就知道了，无论你喜欢不喜欢运动，无论你的运动技能有多差，它有 A、B、C、D 队。好，你好一点你在 A 队，你差一点你在 F 队、D 队，那是取决于你的水平。但到了那个下午的时间，你必须出去比赛。比赛呢，它的体制跟那个现在的那个就是世界杯啊也好，不叫世界杯，叫什么？就是英国的这个联赛也好，都是一样的，有主场有客场，他球队拉出去到别的学校比赛就叫客场，然后呢你回来别人到你这儿来就叫主场，所以你没有的选，你必须只能出去运动，这是你可以差，但是你不能不出去。这是强制性的。我不知道美国可能是说你可以选择可以什么。至于到了大学以后，你想待在房间里面不动，但如果你周围的孩子他都，因为伊顿很大的一个地方，就是它的社会资源特别丰富，孩子们每年会邀请很多各地的世界的知名的人，包括像大熊，他也联系什么伊隆马斯克啦，什么还有一些知名的这些人物啦。过来讲座呀，过来，因为这些人都很喜欢给孩子们去做一些传授一些经验和知识。这个过程我感觉是他们很大的一个资源，是其他别的学校很难拿到的。而且再有就是他们毕业以后，英国的这个叫什么呀？他毕业以后的这个平台和这个 network 非常 strong。让我在他刚刚拿到 offer 的时候，在11岁的时候拿到 offer，13岁上学，他11岁就已经拿到 offer 了。参加了一些 club，像 shooting club。等我们去的时候，我会发现，哦，这里从10几岁一直到60几岁，都是从伊顿毕业出来去剑桥的。那可能另外一个 club 又都是从哈罗毕业出来以后，然后去剑桥的。他们每一个的这个小团体特别 strong，这就导致了当他们出去到社会上以后，互相之间的这个紧密的联系和这个关系，其实非常有用。英国特别讲这种文化，
非常强的 connection， 对，校友文化，
对，是的，
非常好，对。大家还有各种问题吗？有问题的话，我们也可以再问。那么我问一个问题，就是说在申请大学的过程中，那就是说大熊，你认为就是我们的顾问在帮助你修改文书的时候，就 essay 这块儿给到了你什么样的一个建议？你觉得对于我们的顾问，你从这里获得了哪些的一个经验啊？对 essay 这方面。
I think it's basically one of the things we talked about was having an emotive essay, right? You gotta emotionally connect yourself to the US admissions officer, right? But although that's not necessarily true in the UK, it got me thinking about what is it like? What do the UK want to read? Because so when I talked to the consultant, your consultant, he told me basically what they care about is they don't really care how good you are because okay, they do, but like everyone's application is going to be good. Everyone's going to have something special, but what makes your story interesting to them? And in the US essay, this is like a really brief summary, but was basically like you just gotta emotionally appeal to them. You gotta convince them that you deserve to have a place. And it got me thinking. In the UK, what do they want to read? What makes them think, oh, that applicant is memorable. I wanna accept that applicant. And I guess in the UK, it's thinking about it from the perspective of the person reading it rather than the person writing it. Because something you might find interesting might not necessarily be even remotely interesting to the admissions officer. So for me, when I first wrote it, it was first wrote my personal statement. It was very, very like, oh, I did this. I did this competition, which makes me good at this, so therefore you should accept me, blah, 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 stuff like that. I think after talking to the consultant, I thought about it, and I was like, well, the UK, they don't really care about what kind of upbringing you've had. They also don't really care too much about what kind of person you are when it comes to the personal statement, at least. But you can make yourself an interesting applicant by showing that you are a unique student. So, for example, you might write, instead of writing about what you've done, or like how that makes you good or anything, you can choose to write about, discuss a topic of interest. So you just talk about, but you can't just write an essay and say, discussing, let's say, discussing like the trolley problem, let's say. You can't just write an essay discussing the trolley problem. You have to somehow make it seem that you yourself are a teachable and interesting applicant. So I guess in particular, it's just like, obviously it's not directly, nothing which the consultant said could be directly applied to the UK because his advice was for US applications. But for me, it was still a very useful experience because the questions he asked are the same questions I should be asking for all UK applicants, admissions officers. It's about like not what you would think they want to hear. It's what it's not what you think. It's not what you want to tell them. It's what you think they want you to tell them about yourself. So I guess that was the most important thing, rather than just like talking about, oh, I'm great. I do this, which makes me good. It's more about, I'm an interesting student. This is why. So I guess that's what I would summarize it as.
非常有趣的一些说，妈妈，你有这边有补充吗？关于他 IC 这块的一些写作的内容？
我觉得这部分内容呢，其实我们的争论是最大的。有些内容我想加入，有些内容他想写的。看完以后呢，我认为有一些，就像他提到的比较浮华的一些东西，应该写进去。这个我们因为怎么说呢？我们有很多经验指导这些学生来去如何写这些 PS， 但是一定是到了这种级别的学校，每一个都不同，每一个都不一样。如何就像说能够走到这一步的学生，每个都是精英，每个都是好的。如何在这里面看出你不同的点？像我想说，哦，他之前有一个电脑的一个什么考试，在全英国考了第1名，那一定要写在。不能说粗体大字吧，那应该拎出来呀。你想学 computer science， 你之前在那个英国你考过一次第1名，一定要重点写。但在他那他就觉得说，就随便的写在中间，夹在中间，甚至他的第1名他都没写，他就写了一个1，然后写了一个小井号在那儿。我说这要是我都没太看清，没看着，稍微忽视一下就过去了。他就坚持就这样，可能这是由于他受英国教育，他认为要低调一点，认为要什么样，我感觉这是不一样的地方。慢慢的，我觉得他被录取到，我应该说不是他每一条他都对，依然还是说他大部分是对的。有一些我看到了以后，我觉得其实那个地方如果我想补充一下，可能会更好。其实绝对是每一个不一样的，每一单都不一样。到这个级别，而且只是这些也不行，我们后面的工作要分析好。这个学院制里面，这个学院在 computer science， 比如说他的学院今年才招2个人，全世界招2个人。那这些数据从哪儿来的呢？你要分析过往的那个年头。他去年没招，他前年可能又招了几个，又招几个，然后你分析一下，在你报考的时候，这个非常非常有学问，就是 根据你孩子的成绩，你想报哪个学院？这个学院里面，这个比如说你想学生物，生物化学、生物制药，通常这个学院里他招几个人？生物制药这个在这个 college，在整个牛津，在剑桥里面，那他的这个学院是不是最好的？这个专业在这个学院，这个学院在这个专业是不是整个牛津大学、剑桥大学最好的？你也得想清楚。然后他每年招几个人，你也要想清楚。就这些后续的这个东西，配合他的这些 PS 啊，配合他的这些 interview，全部是一个整体的一个东西。就像，因为这个要如果讲的话，就时间太久了，有很多细节。就像我看你们申请，就像我看申请你们美国大学，我也觉得，哇，好多内容啊，好多东西，我就觉得我不理解，我不明白，我必须得找人去问。但我们要想让我说的话，太多东西了，只是所有东西整合在一起，你才能够说成功。
对，就是像我们美国的这个 college application，其实有的时候它就是要求你150个字母，你要把你所有的这个兴趣爱好，你所有的成就，用150个字母写出来，而不是说150个单词。所以就说非常的就是说严格的，你要怎么组织你的语言，你要怎么就是说去写的更简练，就是你要精炼到每一个字。那么就是说，这个组织这个语言对于这个孩子来说，或者是说，都是非常挑战的。也包括就是我们为什么我们到后面就是说巨大的工作量，就是我们的 counselor 和我们的孩子都有巨大的工作量，包括就是说，每个大学他想要什么样的孩子，每个专业想要什么的孩子，就是都是就是你要去弄清楚，你要通过你的顾问去弄清楚，而且就是说。刚才你说的像比如 computer science 这个剑桥大学只收2位，那就是简直是
不是，sorry 啊，不是剑桥大学，是每个学院，它有30几个学院。我这个学校招2个，那个学院招9个，然后那个学院可能他就不招那个 computer science 这个专业的，然后它不一样。那你报考的时候，你必须要报考学院，你不是说我就报一个剑桥大学就 OK 了，你要报考哪一个学院？这个学院如果没收你，他要如果觉得这个孩子我没收他，因为我的名额满了，但他还行，我感觉他够了我们剑桥大学的标准了。这个时候他就给你放到一个pool里面，那个pool，然后别的学院到这pool里面来选，觉得我们这不够，没招到我们满意的，我们到pool里看能不能拎出谁来，然后再也招进。就他的系统了解清楚，然后你后续的 information 这些 support。你要掌握的足够了。其实每个家长如果他们认真，也能够做得到。很多信息都是官方的，就是也可以。但如果要是说想真正做到全面，就还是要有专业人士。这个我也是在慢慢学的过程之中，这十几年，每年都学到新的内容。应该说，每年我都自己都学到新的东西。
刚才我妈不是说，你可以看每个 college 每个学院每个科目有几个人吗？我现在在 chat 里面发了一个 link，你在这个 link 顶上你可以找到剑桥每年每个 college 有几个人报，几个人收到 offer 了，and etc。
对，甚至还有分析一些，他那个分析数据显示多少是 local 的英国的学生，多少是
对，
国际生，这些信息都要整合在一起，最后你才能决定说，哦，我要报那个学院。对，这个都是要一个 teamwork。
是的，非常严谨的一个过程。这个整个的，像我们在美国申请也是每一所大学到最后的，就是整个的，所有的 application 这一块儿，对于学生还有包括 IC 的写作，就是你其实就是一个，塑造你一个非常完美的一个故事。你是一个，刚才大雄也讲了，你一个有趣的人，但是你怎么把这些东西通过你4年的一个回溯，你去看到我未来前面的4年我做了什么。我能够写到这里面。当然了，就是说，写到你的 college application 里，包括你的 essay 里，还有包括你每次申请大学，它的要求是什么，都是要去严格的看你的这个大学申请的这个，就是你所向往的大学申请的这个 college application 的它的要求，再跟你的顾问去讨论，非常非常，所以是非常是严密的一个过程的，
而且英美两个国家，我想有一个共通点的地方，就是当到了我们面前所申请的这些学生，都是要精英学校，都是好学生，我觉得每个都是精英。那么，如何所谓的包装，其实也不是包装，而是从哪一个切入点能够抓住这个 officer 这个招生官的那个一下让他眼睛就亮了，就是这个哪个切入点很重要。孩子们都优秀，只是排列出来的话，就特别苍白无力。但哪一个切入点能够刚好就是触到他的那个痛点，或者让他突然眼儿就亮了，这个就是我们的工作。很多时候，
好的，你们那边的时间已经非常晚了。那么大家如果没有问题的话，我们就今天就差不多就结束了。也希望你们早点休息。
那可以，刚好我们时间上也是刚好1个半小时。是的，
好的，
非常荣幸今天能跟大家分享一下我们过往的这些经历，希望能帮助上你们。
谢谢，非常好。大熊是一个非常优秀的孩子，然后再次恭喜你进入了剑桥计算机专业啊！希望你
谢谢。
未来几年之后，你肯定是要去想开自己的公司，或者是有所建树。估计你可能已经开始在谋划了啊。
很快2年以后我就给你们送过去了。他第3年的时候就去美国了，
又归我了。
给你们送过去了。
对，
好，
到时候希望能够去一个非常好的，申请一个非常好的计算机学院，是非常好的学校，都能够充分展示你的优势啊，而且能够如鱼得水，在美国啊，
谢谢。
谢谢你们的时间，谢谢你的时间啊，
客气。Goodbye.
Good night，早点休息
Goodbye. Good night.
，Night。